how would the world react if it knew the secret of the Rifleman? That question was once asked by a TV host at the start of an old Hollywood broadcast. But the secret they spoke of wasn't a scandal, nor some hidden darkness. It was simply the real life few ever knew, the life of a man named Chuck Connors, the Western legend who walked off screen with sad eyes and a lonely stance. More than half a century ago, every Monday night, America paused before its small television sets to watch The Rifleman. A widowed father, a young son, and a Winchester rifle, symbols of morality, courage, and integrity. But behind that image was a man of flesh and blood, a World War II veteran, a professional athlete in both basketball and baseball, and someone who had tasted the deep loneliness of a man carrying too many titles, yet with few places to belong. Chuck Connors never lived loudly. He didn't seek the spotlight, yet light always seemed to find him. And when Hollywood chased after new faces, he chose the opposite, to remain the same. Honest, straightforward, and unapologetically himself. His story isn't about glory, it's about dignity, about the integrity of a man who refused to compromise, even at the cost of his own solitude. In the end, people still ask, what makes a man choose to live rightly, even when no one else seems to care? The answer lies in a journey that began long ago, in Brooklyn, 1921, where a boy named Kevin Connors had no idea that his entire life would become a long conversation between light and silence. Brooklyn, 1921. In a small apartment near the docks, amid the sound of ship horns and the scent of coal smoke, Kevin Joseph Connors let out his first cry. His father, Alan Connors, was an Irish longshoreman, a man who worked all day in the cold wind and salty air. His mother, Marcella, was a gentlewoman who always carried a small radio with her. Each night, when the city slept, she would turn it on to a baseball broadcast and smile softly. They say the Dodgers won again, Kevin. The Connors family wasn't wealthy, but they had faith, love, and something Chuck would later call the resilience of those who aren't allowed to give up. Brooklyn back then wasn't a place for dreamers. Red brick buildings, grimy streets, and children who studied by day and worked by night to help their parents. But it was there that Chuck's character was forged. Quiet, steady, few words, but never retreating. Young Kevin soon realized how different his family was. His father was strict, reserved, sometimes distant. He believed that men should be strong and never show emotion. Whenever Kevin talked about his dream of playing ball, his father would just shake his head. Son, real life doesn't have an audience. But across the small kitchen, his mother was different. She believed in her son's dreams. She would sit by the radio, reciting the names of players and games of the Brooklyn Dodgers. Kevin listened in silence, his eyes lighting up every time he heard names like Jackie Robinson or stories of legendary home runs. That was how his love for sports began. Not for victory, but because it was the only joy a poor childhood could afford. Kevin grew taller than his friends, with broad shoulders and firm hands. He preferred observing quietly to speaking. When classmates teased him for being lanky, he just smiled and kept playing. In class, he never stood out. But once on the field, every eye turned toward him. One day, during a small school baseball tournament, Kevin's swing sent the ball soaring over the iron fence and down the street corner. The crowd roared. The boy simply stood there, lips pressed in a shy smile, as if he didn't want the moment to end. The coach came over, patted his shoulder, and said, "You may not have been born into wealth, but God gave you something rarer: discipline and honesty." Those words stayed with Kevin forever. As did the winter evening of 1933, when his father lost his job during the Great Depression. Kevin watched the large man in the house fall silent, his calloused hands resting on a dinner table without meat. That night, Kevin whispered to his mother, "I'll play well, so Dad won't have to work so hard anymore." She smiled and stroked his hair. "Don't play to escape poverty, son. Play to learn how strong you are." At 16, Kevin began playing for his school team. He took the first base position, the one that demanded agility, precision, and calm. From those days, people started calling him Chuck. No one really knew who came up with it first. Some said it was because he often shouted, "Chuck it to me," when catching the ball, and the nickname simply stuck. But to Kevin, that new name felt like a perfect fit: strong, decisive, and most importantly, chosen by himself. Under the name Chuck Connors, the Brooklyn boy was born a second time. He still lived in the same poor neighborhood, still walked miles to school, still helped his parents unload goods at the docks. But now, he could see another world, one where a man could rise above his origins through sheer will and decency. Once, after an exceptional game, the coach offered to introduce Chuck to a scout from Seton Hall University. He stood silently for a moment, then looked toward the stands where his parents waited. His father remained quiet, but his mother smiled and gave a gentle nod. In that instant, Chuck understood. It was time to leave Brooklyn. Not to forget it, but to prove that what it had taught him would stay for life. Determination, integrity, and the belief that a man's worth isn't defined by where he comes from. And so, on a morning in 1938, the young man boarded a train leaving Brooklyn, leaving behind the coal smoke, the harbor, and his mother's radio voice still echoing softly in the distance. The childhood of Chuck Connors ended with that sound, warm, simple, and full of strength, opening a new journey where the first swings of a bat would carry him toward the light he had chosen for himself. Autumn 1939, a misty morning in Brooklyn. A train carried a tall young man away from the city, heading toward New Jersey. In his luggage were only a few sets of clothes, an old baseball glove, and a belief that if he worked hard enough, dreams could come true. People still called him Kevin, but he had grown accustomed to his new name, Chuck Connors. At Seton Hall University, Chuck quickly drew attention. He earned an athletic scholarship and excelled in both baseball and basketball. In the dormitory, he was always the first to rise and the last to leave the practice field. Friends recalled that whenever the team struggled, Chuck would say, "Don't worry, we've still got one inning left to do what's right." The words sounded simple, yet they became his lifelong philosophy. There's always a final inning to make things right, as long as a man refuses to give up. Despite his athletic talent attracting scouts, Chuck wasn't the boastful type of athlete. He preferred discipline to noise, listening to speaking, effort to fame. While others dreamed of stardom, he spent time in rhetoric classes, practicing speeches in front of a mirror, building confidence in every word. His friends joked, "You planning to be an actor someday?" He laughed, "No. But if life throws me a role, I want to play it well." That line would later sound like prophecy, but just as everything was looking up, World War II erupted. In 1942, Chuck Connors left the field and put on a military uniform. He joined the U.S. Army, serving as a tank instructor in Kentucky, later transferring to West Point, only a few dozen miles from Brooklyn. He never went to the front lines, but 3 years in the military changed him. In a letter to his mother, he once wrote, "Don't worry, Mom. I'm learning more here than I ever did in school. Learning responsibility, learning to keep my word." Even in uniform, Chuck never abandoned sports. He formed a baseball team within the camp, coached his fellow soldiers, and organized games to raise funds for troops on the front. A local military paper once wrote, "Connors isn't just a great pitcher. He's the kind of man who makes everyone believe that discipline can be joyful." That image, strong but kind, would follow him for the rest of his life. When the war ended in 1945, Chuck left the service with the rank of sergeant. He returned to civilian life with a burning desire to play again. Less than a year later, he signed a contract with the Brooklyn Dodgers, the very team his mother had once adored, and took the field for their minor league affiliate. When he first stepped onto Ebbets Field, the same place he had once watched from behind the fence, he whispered softly, "Mom, I'm here." Chuck went on to play for the Montreal Royals and Chicago Cubs, known for his 6'5", 196 mint frame and powerful throws. He was described as a player full of ability and willpower, but without showy ambition. During this time, he also tried his hand at professional basketball, joining the Boston Celtics, becoming one of the few in history to play in both MLB and NBA. His versatility earned admiration across the sports world, but inside, he began to feel hollow. Post-war America was drunk on victory. People cheered, celebrated, and laughed. Yet Chuck felt detached. A teammate once recalled, "One night we went out to celebrate a win, and he just sat there staring at the empty stands, then said, 'You ever think maybe we're the ones playing roles, and the audience are the real people?'" No one truly understood what he meant. But for Chuck, that was the first time he realized, perhaps the ball field wasn't the only place he belonged. In 1951, by pure chance, he was invited to be an extra in an MGM sports film called Pat and Mike. Director Bill Grady noticed the way he moved, the way he spoke, and said, "You don't need to learn acting. You just stand there, and people believe you." That was the first time Chuck Connors stood before a camera, and the first time he ever felt truly seen. The shift didn't come from ambition, but from intuition. He had spent his whole life practicing discipline, patience, and honesty. And now, Hollywood was just another arena where he could play by those same rules. From the Brooklyn boy clutching his mother's radio, to the tank instructor, to the dual sport athlete, and now to the man facing the lens. His path had never been straight. But one thing had never changed. He never lost himself. And so, when the studio lights came on, Chuck Connors understood. This time, he wasn't playing an athlete anymore. He was about to become something larger, a Western icon, a man whose heart carried integrity and whose smile bore the calm of someone who had known both hardship and freedom. A new chapter was beginning. Not on the field, but on the silver screen. Spring 1947. America was still veiled in the lingering smoke of war, yet the baseball fields echoed once more with cheers. Amid a crowd of young players warming up at the Brooklyn Dodgers training camp, a tall man stood still. The sunlight glinted off the wooden bat in his hand, and on his face, no longer that of the boyish Seton Hall student, rested the calm of someone who had lived through a war. He was Chuck Connors, the team's newest player. Few knew that to stand there that morning, he had waited more than 10 years. On his debut for the Dodgers, Chuck played just a single game before being sent back to the minor leagues. Yet he didn't complain. He understood that, just like in the Army, every chance was a test of patience. He worked relentlessly, trained in silence, and moved between minor league teams, Montreal Royals, Los Angeles Angels, Chicago Cubs, earning a reputation for iron discipline and tireless spirit. During those years, people began to notice him, not just for skill, but for his manner. On the field, he was always the one to shake his opponent's hand after a game or help a young ball boy back to his feet. That was what earned him respect. He didn't need to win to be remembered. He only needed to be right. Yet just when his athletic career was stabilizing, fate opened another door: Hollywood. In 1951, while playing for the Cubs, Chuck was invited to appear in a small role in MGM's sports film Pat and Mike. At first he refused, thinking it was just a distraction. But when director Bill Grady saw him step into the frame, he said, "You don't have to act. Just be yourself. People will believe you." Standing before the camera for the first time, Chuck felt something oddly familiar, like standing at the plate, focused, breathing slow, waiting for the perfect pitch. That feeling of living truthfully in the moment unsettled him. For the first time, he realized that perhaps his destiny didn't lie on the field, but under the glow of a studio light. The early supporting roles came slowly, but steadily. He appeared in South Sea Woman, Old Yeller, Trouble Along the Way, portraying soldiers, cowboys, fathers, all reflections of pieces of his own life. Audiences didn't yet know his name, but they remembered his face, the face of a man who seemed to have fought every battle without ever losing his decency. After a while, Chuck left sports and chose acting for good. Many of his teammates couldn't understand. One asked, "You're really quitting sports? You were at the top." Chuck simply replied, "If I keep clinging to an old dream, I'll never know who else I could become." He moved to California, starting over. No fame, no big contracts, only the belief that an honest man could still make it in Hollywood. While others chased scandals and headlines, Chuck kept his old habits. Waking early, rehearsing lines like batting practice, studying scripts as if they were playbooks. That persistence, at last, paid off. In 1957, director Arnold Lavin noticed him during auditions for a new Western series by ABC. The lead role was that of a widowed father raising his son on the rugged frontier, a man both stern and gentle, embodying the timeless spirit of justice. No one fit the part better than Chuck Connors. He didn't just have the look. He had the soul of a man who had lived, failed, and lost, yet never surrendered his kindness. The audition ended in silence. As he walked out, the producer murmured, "That's the man America's been waiting for." And so, the Rifleman was born. Chuck Connors had no idea that within months, the image of the Western father and his Winchester would enter millions of American homes, transforming him from an unknown athlete into an icon. But in that moment, standing on the set, he thought only of one simple truth. This time, I don't need to prove anything. I just need to live by what I believe. A new chapter of his life began, one of fame, light, and spiritual tests no ball field had ever prepared him for. And in every gunshot that echoed through the Rifleman, one could still hear the lesson his father had once taught him in Brooklyn. Don't just dream. Do. But do what's right. 1958, Hollywood was changing. Westerns flooded the screens, but few touched the hearts of audiences. People had grown tired of the endless gunfire and the heroes who shot faster than they spoke. Then one day, a tall man with broad shoulders stepped into the black and white frame. He didn't smile much. He didn't show off his muscles. He spoke slowly, in a deep tone, and his eyes carried something real. Chuck Connors, once a basketball player for the Boston Celtics, once a soldier in World War II, now stood as Lucas McCain, a widowed father raising his son on the harsh frontier. The Winchester in his hands became a symbol, and the Rifleman became a phenomenon. But that moment didn't happen by chance. Connors wasn't just an actor. He helped shape the very soul of the show. In the early days of production, director Arnold Lavin and producer Jules Levy struggled to find the right face. When Connors walked into the audition room, no one spoke. He simply looked into the camera, tightened his grip on the rifle stock, and breathed. After 10 seconds of silence, Lavin said, "We've found the man America's been waiting for." From that moment on, Connors didn't just play McCain. He lived as McCain. He offered input on everything, from dialogue to the mechanics of the rifle scenes. The Winchester he used was a modified Winchester Model 1892, specially engineered to fire rapidly, creating the legendary spin-cock rifle fans would never forget. Although the show was set in the 1880s, Connors didn't mind the anachronism. He said, "It doesn't matter what year the gun came from. What matters is what the man holding it is protecting." On set, Connors was disciplined and exacting. He arrived early, checked every prop, and reminded the crew about gun safety. Once, during a scene where he fired 12 shots in 4 seconds, a crew member asked how he could shoot so fast yet stay accurate. Connors smiled and said, "Because I don't shoot to kill, I shoot to teach." That line was later printed across magazines, becoming the moral declaration of the Rifleman. Connors insisted that the series should carry a moral message, not glorify violence. He told one reporter, "I never understood why television treats killing as entertainment. For Lucas, every time he pulls the trigger, it leaves a scar. No bullet is ever fired for pleasure." He kept that promise for all 5 seasons. Not a single episode of The Rifleman ever featured a senseless killing. Between scenes, Connors spent much of his time with Johnny Crawford, the young actor who played his son, Mark McCain. Their bond went beyond acting. Crawford later recalled, "He never yelled, but when he went quiet, the whole set went silent too. Everyone knew he was teaching us how to work with respect." Connors once told him, "Don't act, Johnny. Just live in the scene. If you're honest, the audience will know." That honesty made audiences across America believe in the story of that father and son of the frontier. In its first year, The Rifleman ranked among the top 5 most-watched shows in the United States, reaching 7 million households every week. Thousands of letters poured into the studio, not addressed to producers, but to Mr. Lucas McCain. Many were from parents asking Connors how to raise children or maintain discipline in a changing world. He answered each letter by hand, sometimes with only a few words. There's no formula. Just make sure your child knows you always look them in the eye. One little-known story. When the studio wanted to add a romantic female character to boost appeal, Connors objected. The Rifleman doesn't need romantic love. It needs a father's love. But when the studio finally insisted, he took charge of the auditions himself. After more than 60 candidates, he chose Patricia Blair. He later told a magazine, "I thought I'd been given a dream assignment, but it turned out to be a nightmare. 60 women, 60 hopes, until she walked in and smiled. That precision and care earned him the crew's respect." Director Arnold Lavin once said, "Connors was the soul of the show. If he said Lucas McCain wouldn't do that, we stopped and listened." While Hollywood was shifting toward conflicted, morally gray heroes, Connors stayed loyal to an older ideal, the righteous man who takes responsibility. He rejected several scripts, saying the characters were too cold, too bitter. "I won't betray the kids who believed in Lucas McCain," he said. In 1963, The Rifleman ended after 168 episodes, not because of declining ratings, but because Connors chose to end it at its peak. "I didn't want the character to wear thin," he said. "A legend should know when to bow out." When the final scene wrapped, the entire crew lingered on set. Connors removed his cowboy hat, placed it on the prop table, and gazed silently at the familiar Winchester. No one spoke. He whispered softly, "You've served well, old friend." When the finale aired, America fell silent. Newspapers wrote, "We haven't just lost a show, we've lost a father the nation once believed in." And it was true. For millions of viewers, Lucas McCain was more than a character. He was a symbol of dignity, reminding people that strength doesn't lie in the barrel of a gun, but in the compassion that knows when not to fire. At the height of fame, Chuck Connors still chose to live like his character, calm, steady, unassuming. Because he understood one thing: light may fade, but integrity never does. After 1963, when The Rifleman came to an end, America entered a new era. The world that Chuck Connors had once embodied, principled, calm, and old-fashioned, was being replaced by a new Hollywood. Louder, more rebellious, and full of shadows. But Connors didn't change. He remained a man of the old code. And that, ironically, was what made him begin to feel out of place. His career after The Rifleman was no longer easy. Though beloved, Connors found himself typecast as Lucas McCain, the upright Western hero, decent, measured, deliberate. Young directors wanted a different kind of hero, wilder, more complex, even ruthless. One of them told him bluntly, "Chuck, you're too real for a world that's pretending." During those years, he kept working. Branded, Arrest, and Trial, Geronimo. Projects that tried to revive his image of integrity. But none captured the public the way The Rifleman had. Audiences wanted something else now. Hollywood had changed its rhythm, but he hadn't. Still speaking little, doing much, and believing in honor. Around that time, his first marriage, to Elizabeth Jane Riddell, the woman who had stood by him before fame, fell apart. 13 years, 4 sons, and too many months away on set. When he signed the divorce papers, he said quietly, "I never betrayed her. I was just gone too long." After The Rifleman, he married Kamala Devi, the Indian-born actress who had co-starred with him in Geronimo, 1962. It was a union between two kindred spirits. But when the lights dimmed, cultural differences and long absences pulled them apart. When asked about the divorce, Connors smiled faintly and said, "We understood each other on screen. Off-screen, neither of us wanted to be the one to cause pain." Then came his third marriage, to Faith Quabius, an actress nearly 20 years his junior. Brief, fragile, and over within a few years. After that, Chuck Connors never married again. In a rare 1978 interview, he said, "I'm not good at love, but I'm loyal." Maybe the world doesn't need that kind of man anymore. As he grew older, Connors spoke less. Friends said he had a ritual, arriving at the set early, sitting alone in the dressing room, staring into the mirror for a long time before putting on his costume. Not to fix his hair, but to see how much of himself was still there. Yet he never lost his professionalism. Even on small productions, he arrived early, checked his own props, and thanked every crew member. A cameraman once recalled, "When the equipment broke, everyone panicked. He just sat down, lit a cigarette, and said softly, 'It's fine. We can do another take. Just don't keep retaking yourself too many times.'" By the mid-1970s, Connors lived quietly in a modest house in Los Angeles. No parties, no noise. On his wall hung a black and white photo of Lucas McCain and young Johnny Crawford, their eyes locked, as if still in conversation. The boy had grown up, the father had aged, but the bond between them hadn't faded. Crawford once visited, and Connors cooked for him like in the old days. "I joked, 'Still using that Winchester, Dad?' He laughed and said, 'No, son, now I use coffee.'" Those who knew him said Connors lived by discipline, like the athlete he once was. He woke at 5 a.m., exercised, read the papers, then played ball for fun in his yard. Sometimes he appeared on TV talk shows, reminiscing about the Rifleman. But when asked if he missed the role, he simply said, "No, I don't miss it. But I know every man has a bit of Lucas in him. The question is whether he dares to live by it." By the late 70s, the light around him had dimmed. Roles grew scarce. Younger audiences no longer knew his name, but at fan conventions, veterans and middle-aged fathers still lined up to shake his hand and say, "Thank you for teaching us how to be fathers." One afternoon, after finishing a small guest role, a young crew member asked, "Do you ever feel sad that you're no longer at the center of the screen?" Connors looked into the distance, his voice low. "I've been at the center, but the light was never where I belonged. I like the shadows. From there I can see everything." That line sounded philosophical, but it was really the confession of a man who had once stood at the peak, now seeking peace for what remained of his life. In a world moving too fast, Chuck Connors stood still, like an old rock in the desert, unshaken but no longer touched. And perhaps that was his most beautiful tragedy, a man who chose to stay good in a time when goodness had gone out of style. The 1980s, Hollywood had changed. The world Chuck Connors once represented, the quiet, honorable heroes with unshakable self-respect, seemed to have no place left. Movies were louder now, packed with special effects and short on morality. But amid the rush, Connors remained the same. No longer a leading star, he was still the first to arrive on set, shaking every hand, never keeping anyone waiting. A young director once said, "He doesn't need praise, he just needs to do his job right." After The Rifleman, Connors didn't vanish. He merely slowed down. He quietly took small roles in Tourist Trap, 1979, Airplane 2, 1982, and Werewolf, 1987. Those performances didn't bring him fame, but for him, acting was never about fame. It was about living. Even when no longer under the spotlight, he worked with the same discipline as before, reading every script carefully, checking his own props, and thanking every crew member. It was how he preserved his honor, the only thing he valued more than success. That sense of honor led him to one of the strangest moments of his life, a meeting no actor could ever have imagined. In 1973, during the height of the Cold War, President Richard Nixon hosted a diplomatic meeting with Soviet leader Leonid Brezhnev at the White House. Among the dignitaries, one name surprised everyone: Chuck Connors, the Rifleman. Brezhnev was a devoted fan of American westerns, and especially of Connors's portrayal of the righteous frontier father. When Connors entered the room, the Soviet leader burst into laughter, strode forward, and, to everyone's astonishment, lifted the tall actor clean off the ground. The room erupted in laughter. Tension dissolved in an instant. Connors presented Brezhnev with 2 Colt .45 revolvers and a cowboy hat, symbols of the American West. Brezhnev took his hand and said, "If every American were like you, this world would be a more peaceful place." That gesture was never recorded in any diplomatic document, but it made the meeting one of the rare, warm moments between 2 superpowers. The press nicknamed him the Cowboy Diplomat. He gave no speech, no performance. He simply stood there as himself, speaking in a language all nations understood: character. In the years that followed, Connors maintained a close friendship with President Ronald Reagan, his old colleague from their Western acting days. They often met at veterans' fundraisers and sports events, reminiscing about an America that was kinder, slower, and more faithful. Reagan once said, "Chuck is the kind of American I want the world to see, strong, honest, and humble." Connors never held political power, but his sincerity made him a quiet representative of a generation, one that believed dignity mattered more than fame. By his 60s, Connors returned to his first love, sports. He appeared at charity games, throwing ceremonial first pitches for the Dodgers, the Cubs, and the Celtics, the 3 teams that had marked his life. On his jacket were 2 patches: Dodgers and the Rifleman. When asked why he still wore them, he smiled. "One taught me how to win. The other taught me how to lose, with my head held high." That line, for Connors, summed up his life's philosophy. As time passed, his health declined, the price of decades of heavy smoking, but he never complained. Each morning, he still rose early, brewed coffee, read the paper, and stood on his porch watching the sunrise. A friend once asked, "Do you miss the lights?" He replied slowly, "I've stood in the light. Now I just want to see if I can still shine without it." On November 10th, 1992, Chuck Connors passed away in Los Angeles at the age of 71. His funeral was quiet, without fanfare. On his gravestone were 3 small emblems: Dodgers, Cubs, and Celtics, along with an engraving of Lucas McCain holding his Winchester. No grand epitaph, only 4 simple words. He stood tall. At the service, Johnny Crawford, the boy who had once played his son in The Rifleman, stood silently by the grave. He placed an old cowboy hat on it and whispered, "You're not gone, Dad. You've just ridden a little farther west." To this day, people remember Chuck Connors as the final embodiment of a more genuine America. A cowboy who didn't need to act, a man who never bowed his head, and a soul who lived true to the 2 words he once used to describe himself: enduring strength. Because some lights don't need a stage to shine, and Chuck Connors was one of them. When Chuck Connors passed away in 1992, America was no longer the country he once symbolized. And yet, more than 3 decades later, the image of the Western man holding his Winchester rifle still returns faithfully to television screens. Not because of special effects, not because of nostalgia or fame, but because he had become something rare in Hollywood history: integrity made real. From 1958 to 1963, The Rifleman aired 168 episodes on ABC, climbing into the top 5 most-watched programs in America, with an average of over 7 million households each week. More than half a century later, it still airs regularly on MeTV and AMC, drawing over 25 million annual viewers, an astonishing number for a black-and-white series more than 60 years old. In 2019, the American Film Institute, AFI, honored The Rifleman as one of 50 television series that shaped American morality. And at the heart of that legacy remains Connors himself, the man audiences believed in so deeply that, as one viewer once wrote, Lucas McCain doesn't just live on screen, he lives in our hearts. Over a career spanning 4 decades, Connors appeared in more than 120 films and television shows, sharing the screen with legends like John Wayne, Charlton Heston, and James Garner. He was also one of only 9 people in U.S. history to play professionally in both the NBA and Major League Baseball, a feat so rare that ESPN once called him the ultimate American athlete turned actor. At age 27, he played for the Boston Celtics and the Chicago Cubs, averaging 6.8 points per basketball game and hitting 17 home runs during the 1947 baseball season. From sports to cinema, Connors carried the same virtues: discipline, composure, and honesty, the qualities that turned his craft into his character. Those who worked with him still recall one small habit. Connors always signed documents with a pencil, never a pen. When asked why, he simply smiled and said, "A pencil may wear down, but truth never fades." A short line, yet enough to define an entire life. Straightforward, honest, and humble to the point of reverence. Johnny Crawford, the boy who once played his son, Mark McCain, spoke through tears at a memorial. "He taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing the right thing even when you're afraid." The Rifleman wasn't about guns. It was about keeping your heart intact. Today, The Rifleman stands not just as a television series, but as a moral monument in American culture. It is displayed at the National Television Museum, and filmmakers such as Clint Eastwood and Kevin Costner still cite it as an inspiration for their more humanistic westerns. On the Hollywood Walk of Fame, Chuck Connors' star lies quietly on Vine Street. Not dazzling, not elevated, but enduring exactly as he lived. When asked what he considered his greatest legacy, the answer wasn't found in numbers, but in spirit. He proved that kindness is not weakness, and that dignity can outlast any golden statue. For many middle-aged Americans, he remains the embodiment of a time when men didn't need to be perfect, only to keep their word. And perhaps, years from now, when colorful spectacles fade away, people will still return to those old black and white frames, where a man could stand still and still shine. Maybe when a man like Chuck Connors leaves this world, he needs no tribute. It's enough that somewhere, among the viewers who once knew him, someone still remembers that calm gaze, that deep voice, and the way he chose to stand tall in a changing world. Because sometimes honesty, that small, outdated virtue, is the only light that outlasts all glory. And if one day, amid today's noisy films, someone happens to stop at the sight of that cowboy, smiles gently, and listens to that familiar voice echoing from an old TV channel, then perhaps the legacy of Chuck Connors is still alive, softly, like a light that never goes out. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more cinematic journeys into the lives behind the fame. This is Hollywood Biographies, the light, the silence, the legacy.